That phrase, closest ally, is often used by the United States in reference to Canada, but the White House described Canada as, quote, one of our nation's top partners this week. Stephanie Carvin is an associate professor of international affairs at Carleton University, and Thomas Juneau is an associate professor of public international affairs at the University of Ottawa, and both are in Ottawa. So first question to you, Professor Carvin. You know, we've just heard this statement from Joe Biden. I know there's symbolism in these kinds of things. We get wrapped up in it, but what is the broader message about Canada's place in the world in terms of our importance and our foreign policy?
I think Canada at first needs to take a deep breath. Joe Biden's a nice guy. This sounds like a Bidenism to me. And I don't think by saying that, you know, America has no greater friend than Australia, it doesn't mean that, you know, we haven't lost our place on the in the pecking order, as it were. It is really, I think, just Joe Biden being nice.
Yeah, but now I hear a big but coming.
You're right, actually, yeah. But I do think that, you know, the fact is Australia has, you know, come to the attention of the United States because they do something that we don't, which is take foreign policy seriously. And they have, you know, they work very hard. They have a lot of representatives in key U.S. foreign policy and defense and intelligence institutions. And they are constantly making their views known. They have a very active foreign policy. And we haven't even had a foreign policy in like 15 years. So, you know, we shouldn't be that surprised that, you know, the United States is looking around at who's there and who's making themselves known and who's doing the work when it comes to who it believes are its friends and allies in the world.
Okay. Thomas Juneau, do you agree that Canada really hasn't had a foreign policy in 15 years? And if that's the case, whose fault is that?
I would say more than 15 years, if anything. Whose fault is that? I think geography's fault, just to avoid, no, and I'm not avoiding blaming anybody. We sit on top of the United States. We are safe. We are secure, more than pretty much any other country in the world. We benefit from the relationship with the United States from a security perspective, from a prosperity perspective. And I think over the years, that's led us to take these things for granted a bit too much. It's led us over the years to neglect foreign policy. And by us, I mean successive governments, certainly the current one, but the previous ones too, to varying extents, the population as a whole. So we've had a bit of a dilettante approach to foreign policy because we can basically afford to neglect it. A lot of other countries, if or when they neglect foreign policy, national security, they pay a price. Whereas in Canada, because of the luxury of our geography, we pay either no price or only a limited price. And what we're seeing right now is a good example of that dynamic. The U.S. needs very specific things. It goes where it can get them. And right now, in dealing with China, it can get that much more from Australia than from us.
Okay, let's because Australia and Canada are being compared in this sense. Stephanie Carvin, what is it that Australia is doing that Canada perhaps ought to be doing?
So Tama and I both traveled to Washington, D.C. in 2019 and interviewed both American and Canadian officials about Canada-U.S. relations. And it was really interesting because we weren't actually even asking about Australia, but Australia constantly came up as, you know, doing the kinds of things that Canada should be doing. So what is that? That is, in the first instance, making sure that they have representatives, many representatives, you know, at Department of Defense, at the various intelligence agencies, at State Department, right, that are actually embedded in those institutions. And yeah, we are represented there, but it's not just the amount of people they have there on the ground, but also a second important contribution that they're making is that when they go to meetings, they actually say things that are worthwhile saying. So in other words, they say, you know, when they go to meetings, they make their views known. They bring information to the table. They bring important insights. Whereas, you know, a lot of times when we talk to officials, they said, well, we don't really think of Canada if it was in the case of the United States because, you know, we didn't really say very much. Or Canadian officials express frustration that, you know, when we do say things, it's, you know, very cautious. Sometimes we just sit in meetings. We're not really contributing, or if we contribute, it's pretty bland statements. We're not bringing ideas to the table. So I think these are two areas where Australia is succeeding that Canada isn't. It's not just, I don't think Canada needs to buy nuclear subs. That's a whole separate conversation. It's just about actually showing up and having something useful to say. And then I would say a third thing that we often heard was that in a lot of these meetings that, whereas Canada would kind of bring like strategic level, high level analysis, but the Australians are much better at bringing in more granular, useful, tactical information to conversations as well, which is something the Americans really, really value.
Straight up actionable intelligence.
Yes, exactly.
Thomas, again, the context in which this is happening, Australia, Canada, but the U.S. along with, all of these countries really part of the Five Eyes, that intelligence sharing group. New Zealand, not part of this deal either, and New Zealand has sort of faced criticism for perhaps, if not being too close to China, then not standing up to China. Australia is seen in a very different way, standing up and having a firm line against China. Where does Canada fit in this when you have the Five Eyes, one of them, New Zealand, not really part of this, Canada also not a part of this? Is the thinking that essentially there's just three eyes now?
Well, no, there's definitely still Five Eyes, and some of the commentary that we heard in the last week or so was a bit over the top in terms of predicting the end of the Five Eyes. The Five Eyes are still a very strong, very vibrant partnership. There's intelligence sharing, there's policy coordination. Some of the intelligence sharing is at the scientific and technical level, at the counterterrorism level. Canada benefits a lot from the Five Eyes. And it will continue to do so. I think everything Stephanie just said in answer to your previous question absolutely holds. We need to contribute better to the Five Eyes. And it's not only a question of quantity, but also of quality. New Zealand is a bit of a separate case. It's a very small country. There's resource challenges for New Zealand anytime you talk about the Five Eyes. So that they've always had a bit of a 4.5 status in the Five Eyes. Their presence is appreciated, but it's challenging, if only because of size. On the Canadian side, I think the issue of standing up to China has been played a bit too much, in some cases for political reasons, as one reason why in this case there's the Three Eyes Forum. I don't think that's the dominant reason why Canada has a bit of a hard time getting heard at the table. It's much more an issue of coming to the table, as Stephanie was saying, with a very specific Canadian perspective. Stephanie used the word bland. What Canada needs to start doing is to better define its interests, to show up at these meetings with assets, with capabilities, but also with ideas, with positions, with insights that are specifically Canadian. If that involves standing up to China more, that's fine. But I don't think that's the core issue why we have a hard time getting heard in these meetings.
Yeah, I mean, Stephanie Carvin, just to speaking to what you were talking about a bit earlier, you sometimes get the sense, at least outwardly, that Canadian foreign policy is either, well, we'll just do whatever the Americans are doing, or if we really disagree with that, we're not going to loudly say we disagree with it, but we'll say, oh, that's an idea, it's just not one we're going to participate in. What does it say about what Canada's national security policy actually is?
Oh, boy, it's funny you say that we have a national security policy. I'm not sure we do. I think one of the issues is that, I heard Rush on the radio today, which is a great Canadian institution, and the line, even if you fail to choose, you have already made a choice. And I think that's it. We don't want to decide, right? We are too scared to define our interests, to make a choice as to where we want to go and what we want to prioritize, right? We want to prioritize everything. We don't want to say yes to some things and no to others. And I think as a result of that, we just don't have, we have paralysis, right? We just have not really chosen what our path is in the world. I mean, when I first heard about this agreement and realized it was kind of a nuclear subdeal, I mean, it didn't really freak me out, because Canada doesn't really even have an Indo-Pacific policy. We always kind of look to Europe with regards to our foreign policy. We're not really engaged in that region of the world at all. So, it's not surprising that Australia, the United States, and the UK would come together in some kind of pact and not include us, because where are we? What have we done? So in other words, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think sometimes the problem is we just don't seem to even want to go through the exercise of defining what our interests are, and then let alone coming up with a strategy to actually even act on them.
Okay. I know you two have a lot more to say about this, and I know that because you got a book coming out in December called Intelligence Analysis and Policy Making, the Canadian Experience, so we can all look forward to that. Thanks very much, Stephanie and Thomas. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.